Hey kids, cook real food. Katie Kimball here for the Healthy Parenting Connector. And today we're taking a little bit of a different path, but you'll totally see how our guest today still has to do with our goal of connection, confidence, and creativity in our families and helping you intentional parents raise healthy, independent kids. Dr. Aumatma, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me, Katie. I'm so excited.
We'll do the little formal introduction so people know who you are. So Dr. Aumatma is a naturopathic doctor and nutritionist. She's been in practice close to 15 years, and she specializes in women's health, particularly fertility, which is why I said we're spinning things a little differently today. She's the best-selling author of Fertility Secrets, What Your Doctor Didn't Tell You About Baby Making, and she's a sought-out speaker on topics related to women's health and empowerment. She's done all sorts of media, ABC, Fox, CBS, KTLA, Mind, Body, Green, and The Bump, along with being interviewed for countless podcasts like this one on topics of fertility, pregnancy, and postpartum health. She's well awarded with Best Naturopathic Medicine Doctor locally twice and one of the top women in medicine doctor in 2020. She has an amazing client base, both locally in person and long distance. Plus, she trains practitioners who want to specialize in fertility. Now, I'm not a pregnancy specialist, or this is not a fertility space. This is like for parents. So why are we talking about fertility? And I think you'll see how when Dr. Aumatma talks about the fertility lifestyle and why we need to think about, even with our teens and tweens, setting up their bodies and their physical health for good fertility. You'll be really happy that you listened to Dr. Aumatma. So how did you come to specialize in fertility?
That's a great question. So I was already in practice. I've been in practice as a naturopathic doctor for 15 years, and I've always done women's health in general. But it was probably about 8 or 9 years ago, I was married to this man and wasn't really sure that I wanted to have children with him. And as I went through my own journey, I was like, what am I going to do? And is my fertility going to drop off a cliff? And am I going to just be shooting myself in the foot of the ability to ever have children? And even in naturopathic school, we're taught that fertility magically drops off a cliff at 35. And so that's kind of what I remembered. And I was like, I don't know. I'm getting pretty close to 35. I'm not really sure what I'm going to do with this. Um, so I was just on this journey for myself. And as I was researching, I was just getting more and more shocked about the kind of lies that we were telling women and how there was such a distinction between what research was saying and what media and doctors were telling people. So as I saw that distinction, I started talking about it, and people kept interviewing me for podcasts, and I was like, sure, yeah, I could talk about that because that's what I'm researching.
Mhm.
And it wasn't until, like, I didn't make all the connections that this is my path until people started calling me and were like, hey, maybe you can help me with fertility. And I was like, oh, that wasn't my intention. Like, I'm just talking about the research. So I kind of fell into it just because I I guess I realized along the way, I'm like, I'm super passionate about women having the right information and making the best decisions for themselves, right? So for my perspective, it doesn't, like, I don't have an opinion of IVF or egg freezing or Eastern medicine or naturopathic medicine. I'm like, hey, all things are equal. You have choices. Let's just figure out what the best choice is for you. And yeah, so that's kind of how I made my way into the fertility world, and I love it. I
Yeah.
this is the awesomest thing that I feel like I am honored to be able to do every day. So
Oh, well, and it's so powerful that like clearly this vocation chose you. Like you were just looking into it because of, sort of a life crisis and some really big questions you were grappling with. And now you're helping so many people. And in fact, you have to share the statistic, Dr. Amatma. What is the success rate for infertile couples having babies at your clinic?
so below the age of 38, our success rate is 80%.
Amazing.
And above 38. It drops off a little bit. It's 50%. But when we compare that to like what's possible in other systems, it's like 3%. So it's quite a difference between 3% and 50%. And I think that the way that we approach it is different. So our I would say like we don't go into a scenario with a couple and say, "Oh, our goal is to have a baby." No, our goal is to optimize your fertility, and the byproduct of that is you having a baby. It's
Interesting.
it's not like there are so many paths to getting a baby, right? And so many women are on this path of like, how do I get pregnant? How do I get pregnant? And I'm like, okay, so you're going to get pregnant, and then if you have a miscarriage, is that okay? If it doesn't stick, is that okay? So when you're comparing statistics, it's like we're not comparing, our statistics are women actually having babies, right?
Mm,
And most fertility clinics are giving you a success based on you getting a positive pregnancy test. So that doesn't actually correlate to the live births that women are having. Um, so we just think about it very, very differently. And it doesn't matter if you're a natural doctor, a Western medicine doctor, our goal is how do we help create healthier families? And I think that's where we really
mm.
connect on our intentions are the same, right? Like how do we set up healthier families? So I think that we're on the same page when it comes to like, let's help just have women and couples and babies be healthier.
Yes, absolutely. And and you look at the whole system too. It's not just one organ or one piece of the equation. It's whole body health, really, because that's what's going to optimize whole body fertility. And those, I mean, those statistics just blow me away. I know that gives so much hope to so many women. As a person, so I'm 40 right now, and so as I've kind of gone through my adult years, I feel like I'm almost the only person I know who has not had a miscarriage or struggled with infertility. And I'm like hesitant to even say that because it's so hard. It's so hard
Mhm.
for so many people. I
Mhm.
and again, we'll talk about this fertility lifestyle and our teens and our tweens real soon, but I'm still fascinated by the problems I see and the heartache I see and what is the cause? Like why are so many more couples struggling with infertility in the recent decades?
I think it's multifactorial.
Okay.
I think it's partly our environment is just not conducive to reproductive health.
And do you mean like toxins or like stress in our lifestyle?
Both. So internal
Of
and
course.
external toxins.
Okay.
External toxins being our environment, the air that we breathe. I was just reading some papers on air pollution and how it declines fertility. It's just like, damn it. Like those are things that we don't really have that much control over.
Right, right.
But it's good to be aware so that at least you can have air filters in your house.
Mhm.
We did another series. We do a lot on Instagram education. So we did another series on mold and fertility, and like the impact of mold in your home and how that impacts your fertility. So there are definitely a lot of factors as we talk about toxins in general. But then it's the quality of our food, right? If we're not paying attention to the food that we're eating, we're often grabbing for convenient foods. And, the paleo trend was very interesting. The keto trend was very interesting because I feel like they somehow following some sort of dietary recommendation versus you probably connect to this like let's eat real food
Mhm.
is different, right? If you're talking about like, oh, I need to be gluten free, but if gluten free means you're eating tapioca starch and rice flour, it's probably not that much better.
Mhm.
um
Sure. I mean, the food marketers say, oh, everybody's into paleo. Let's make a whole bunch of paleo products that are very expensive that they can buy.
yeah.
Oh, now let's make very expensive, highly processed keto products, right? That's what you're saying, basically.
Right, exactly. So if you're it's like these diet trends that intentionally they start out great.
Yep.
When you first think about paleo people, they were eating real food.
Hmm.
And then the trends caught on, and then people are like, "Oh, let's make it more convenient and let's do these breads that are gluten-free and crackers that are gluten-free and blah 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 blah." You could create every single item gluten-free, and yet you've not really embodied the intention, which is eat real food.
Right.
um so I think that diet in general, the way that food is processed, the kind of the stress in our lifestyles that leads to wanting to grab convenient foods over like doing the extra work. And I'm just as guilty, like I look at my kitchen and I'm like, we really need to stop eating canned beans. Like those are not good for you. Yet the convenience sometimes outweighs the benefits of soaking our beans and doing all the things. So I think that there's a, a lot of those different factors, and then I think we're not even going to touch on, or maybe we should, the use of birth control and like hormonal birth control in particular, that has shown to negatively impact fertility. So if someone's been taking birth control for 10-15 years, which a lot of and this is where we start talking about the teens, is like a lot of teens are put on birth control for supporting their hormones, supporting in quotes, um,
Yeah.
and 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 then 15 years later, unknowingly, they're like, oh, I'm not having a regular period, or whatever the issue was prior to being put on birth
Mhm.
control comes back. And the number of times women will write and say, I used to have really intense cramps
Right.
for days and I would be in bed, and I got on birth control, they went away. And now I'm trying to get pregnant. I got off of birth control and the cramps are back, and they're like back with a vengeance.
I bet.
Um, so it's really like so many different factors, and I'm not anti birth control. I think that it's an amazing invention for women, but it is like we have to remember, what is our intention? Why are we doing this thing? And if
Sure.
our intention is to improve our hormones, then maybe we ought to look at how do we improve our hormones way before we're even trying to get pregnant.
Sure. I mean, birth control is fundamentally anti-fertility. Like that's literally what its job is. So to me, it makes perfect sense. Like shut down a system unnaturally for 10 years, you can't expect it to just like come right back to life and be in perfect working order. But I know not everyone feels that way.
No,
Um,
and I don't think you're wrong. Like we go through most of our life like, don't get pregnant, don't get pregnant, don't get pregnant. And then the instant that you have the right person and you're like, hey, let's start a
yeah.
family, and then it becomes like the urgency of it needs to happen right away. And well, energetically you shut that part of your body off for how many years? 20, 30 years. And now all of a sudden you're like, okay, do this thing that I told you not to do for 30 years. Um,
Right.
so of course, I think it becomes a lot more challenging.
Yeah.
And I don't think that our ancestors were dealing with those issues, like my if we look at my grandmother, like she had her first child at 14, and we can talk
Oh,
about the
goodness.
issues related to that, but and compared to me, who had a child as a geriatric pregnancy. So like we literally switched to the
Mhm.
other extreme, and it's been a slow revolution, but I do think that we're in this age where women are waiting later and later to have babies. Men are like, I'm not sure if I want to start a family so early. Um, I want to get my foundation and I want to work on my career and whatever.
Mhm.
So we are in a very different mindset in our lives or in our evolution as humanity. And I think that it's okay. Like, I think that we should be empowered to make whatever the choices that's right for us. So if there are couples that are like, hey, I want to get married and have a baby at 20, cool, no problem, go for it. Assuming your family's cool with that. Um, but if you are choosing to wait, then what are you doing to empower your fertility along the way so that when you are ready, it doesn't become a huge challenge?
Sure, sounds good, makes total sense. So in your opinion then, or not in your opinion, in your professional experience, why should people care about fertility when they're just teenagers? I mean, as soon as you say teenager, we're already in the box of like, I'm not forward thinking, right? I see today, I'm living for the moment, I feel invincible. So
Yeah.
it's a huge mountain to climb for a parent to say, oh, honey, maybe you should be thinking about your future children. But even as parents, even if we don't talk about it in those terms, I think we can try as parents to set up the right habits,
Mhm.
right, in childhood that can support all of bodily systems, including fertility. So what do you think? I mean, how do our teenage years impact our future fertility?
Well, I think that our teenage years are the years of exploration, right? Like, that's the period of time in our lives where we want to be exploring the world as well as our own selves. And one of the biggest things that I've seen is that teenagers just aren't super connected or taught to be super connected to their bodies.
Mm,
So, like, everything from the waist down is just turned off.
mm,
It's like, don't connect, shut it down, don't relate to that part of your body. And as a woman, like, that's a pretty big component of who you are. And honestly, like, I could go on a rant about this, but I feel like a lot of our power is actually housed in our reproductive system, or like our general energetic area of the
mm,
second chakra. So when we disconnect from that and we're like, nope, I'm not thinking about periods, I'm not thinking about how to understand what's happening in my body. I'm not taught that either by example from my mother or from school or the people that I'm around. The whole message in our culture is just like, turn it off, don't think about it till you're ready to have a kid.
sure. And deal with it when it comes to periods. Just like deal with it as quickly and easily and mess free as possible. Let's get through it, get over with it.
Yeah, yeah. And like, I have friends who when we were teenagers were taking shots to not have a period for like 4 months or an entire year sometimes, and just like shut off their hormones so that they don't have to deal with the period more than once a year. And I think I heard a woman like doing a TED talk on this, and like she was just so pro shutting off your cycle, and I was just like, I can't believe that this is even a thought. Like,
Mm,
what? So I think that there is a lot of advancement of science that gives us these options, and we have more to consider. But as a parent, and I don't have a young daughter, but if I did, I think that I would really want to encourage her to connect with her body, encourage
mm,
her to like understand what's happening, understand her cycles, and really kind of keep keep the rhythm of, hey, every month we have this cycle and this is what's happening in your body. You're releasing these eggs, that's ovulation. Um and just like, even to the extent of being able to live in a pattern that is better for certain parts of your cycle, right? So
mm,
there's a lot of evidence of that menstruation time being the time to slow down and rest and recoup, kind of like you would in winter.
Mm-hmm.
And then the week after the menses is the spring, and that's when things are starting to wake up. That's a good time to like be outward, connect with other people. Um, and then ovulation time, or the week after that. So that's second to third week of your
Mm-hmm.
cycle. That's a good time to still keep connecting. That's a good time to have deep conversations, or difficult conversations might be easier to have during ovulation time. And then the week after ovulation to really start to, it's like the fall, things are falling
Mm-hmm.
away. Things that maybe weren't as visible are going to come to light, and you might find like, hey, during that time your intuition, your body is pointing you towards things that are out of whack, things that you're not happy about. And like, oh my god, if I had this knowledge as a teenager, what I could have done with that, like just knowing that there were these rhythms and cycles, and that I could like live in sync with what my body was feeling. um and to like, I have never publicly shared this. I was like super depressed as a teenager. I used to like walk around in all black all the time. My periods were awful. Like
Oh.
I was in pain all the time. Um, and and I would PMS, and my PMS was anger towards my parents. So like, as like looking back at it now, I'm like, oh, there were some things that were really like out of alignment in my body, that my body was telling me like, I'm not depressed now, I'm a super happy person. But like my body was trying to tell me like, hey, things are out of whack, you need to
Mm-hmm.
have these conversations, you need to like bring this stuff to light. And it would just come out as PMS,
Yeah.
as like rah! And it could have been completely prevented had I known like, oh, this is what's happening with me, this is when I could have a conversation, this is how I could have a conversation. So like, that kind of knowledge about our bodies is just never taught, right? Like
No.
nobody's teaching this stuff, nobody is empowering young women to say, hey, you can approach it differently, and you can have those difficult conversations easily if you're doing it at the right point in your cycle. And you can become more self-aware and say, oh, I actually like this anger or PMS is actually like stuff that you're pushing down that you need to
Mm-hmm.
like get out in some way. And create a journaling practice, or create a way to like release all of these emotions that you're feeling, because being a teenager is a lot.
It
Like
is hard. It's
hard
hard.
stuff.
It's so hard. The emotions are so big. And yes, for females, especially, the hormones are going up and down. We don't know how to deal with all that as teenagers. We don't have the wisdom of experience. That's the whole problem, right? And we feel like everything matters so much.
Yes.
Yeah, being a teenager is hard. And I think, so many wisdom bombs there. And it's so empowering to understand. I think what I'm hearing you say is two things really. Is one is that your perspective can make a huge difference, right? We can see our period as a horrible thing we have to endure, or as the opportunity to someday have babies, right? We can see our hormonal shifts as something that's really annoying because we're not consistent, and we're never included in research studies because they never know what part of your cycle women will be in, right? That's why studies are always on men.
Yeah.
Or we can say, actually, we can embrace that as a power and say, I know when I can do goal planning when I'm menstruating, and I know I'm going to have my best creative work at this time, and I'm going to be the best social butterfly when I'm ovulating, right? Like, that is incredibly powerful. And if we can shift our perspective, we can take advantage of that. Now, if you're feeling cramps and lower back pain, and you know I know people who like will get faint or even throw up when they're having their cycle, that can get in the way of a lot of empowering knowledge. And you mentioned that you had horrible periods too, so how do we talk to our teens in particular about the cramps, the PMS, the hormones, especially when they're hearing from society, just go on birth control, right? How do we counterbalance that?
Yeah, I think it's good to just like have conversations with them, because I I don't know that, at least the teens that I've talked to, I'm not sure that they want to be on birth control. I'm not sure that they believe in birth control. They're often like, well, what else can I do? Um,
Oh,
so
that's exciting to hear.
yeah, I feel like a lot of teenagers they'll call themselves woke. Like they're really into, what do I do to empower myself? And
Nice.
they're amazing. Like these teenagers, I'm like, I was like you when I was a teenager. You were really
Aw.
so I think that most of the ones that I've talked to, I do some mentoring with teens now because I don't have a daughter. We don't plan on having more kids. So I'm like, okay, well, I wanna
Aw.
help other kids. So I think that having a conversation of, what do you know about birth control? And
Mhm.
then let's talk about, perhaps this is a good option for you. But if there were other ways for you to still feel good in your body, is that something that you want? And you don't need to be on birth control. And you may not know if you want to have a child. When I was a teenager, I was like, no way, I'm never having children. Um, and I thought I was really clear on that
Mhm.
decision. And it wasn't until after I got married and this man started talking about babies that I was like, actually, I think I want to have a child.
Aw.
And oops, I married the wrong person
Oh
to have
no.
a child with. So it was a really like so many emotions
I
that
bet.
I had pushed away. I was like, I don't like kids. It is like so much karma that I get to bring babies into the world, because
Amazing.
my entire life I was like, I hate kids. Why do kids exist? And I was just like not into it.
Uh,
So you might be one of those, your child might be a teenager that is like, I don't ever want to have kids. Like, I don't care about this right now.
mhm.
And even then, what conversation could you have with them that could say, okay, you may not want to have kids, and that's okay. It's your choice. But do you want to leave that option open to have kids?
Right.
Right?
That's
Like you
exactly
want
the phrase
something
that I was just, yeah, I was just thinking in my own head, like if you're closing doors, you might never be able to open them again.
right.
And people change. And I mean, when we're talking about like the things that are impacting the teenagers, the cramps, the feeling horrible, fatigue or PMS or whatever, do you have strategies that
Yeah.
teens could use to alleviate those, or is it very individual? Each person has kind of their own root cause.
I think, of course, I think everybody has their own root cause, but I think there's some like really basic things that, again, had I known,
Yeah.
I probably wouldn't have been in pain for my whole teenage years, right? One of them is getting rid of dairy. I like my whole childhood, my parents would make me drink a glass of milk because we were vegetarian and they thought that that was my way of getting calcium and
Okay.
protein. And intuitively, I hated milk and I thought it was just a preference, but my body just really didn't do well with dairy. And as I've like, now I'm a doctor and I research all this stuff, dairy is not good for hormones because it is, um, even if it's organic, grass fed, as pure as you can get as far as dairy goes, it is still going to have hormones from the cow
Okay.
that is for the baby cow, the calf, to help support the growth of the calf. So those growth hormones are going to throw your own hormones out of whack. Acne,
Mm.
get rid of dairy. Like you get rid of dairy, a lot of stuff goes away.
Isn't that
Um,
fascinating? So I mean, we're probably not saying like no human being should ever have dairy, but if you're having problems, That
Mm,
is that's one approach to take is what happens if I cut out dairy for a month?
yeah.
Wouldn't
Yeah,
that be great if I could solve
exactly.
the acne or solve the cramps?
Yeah. Try it out if it works for you. And I would give it like a month to
Mm.
3 months. Three
Okay.
months for cramps, a month for acne and stuff like that is fine.
Okay.
But for cramps, because your hormones are cyclical, you may not see the impact of cutting out
Oh,
dairy just from the first month.
sure. That
It
totally
takes
makes sense.
a couple of months to see the impact of it. And then sugar. So
Mm,
cutting out sugar will also help support your hormone balance relatively quickly. 2 to 3
okay.
months, you'll see a difference, right? So that, and then eating more real food,
Mm,
vegetables specifically,
yeah.
like as many vegetables as you can manage to eat. And as a teenager, that's super challenging because you're
Mhm.
that's not a thing that most teenagers do. Hopefully I feel like your kids are probably doing that.
I mean, I feel like they're above average, but like life and health is not graded on a curve, even though I'd love to, some days I like console myself, like, oh, we're doing so much better than everyone else. And it's like, yeah, but if you're still sick, you're still sick. Bummer. So, yeah, more vegetables, always a good goal. Now, when you talk about sugar, is that like zero tolerance sugar or like let's severely reduce the sugar? And does that include natural sugars like honey and maple syrup?
Mm. So I would say for the population that we're talking about, I think they can probably do natural sugar in small amounts. That'll be fine.
Mhm.
Um, and for like no sugar, I think it's a good goal.
Yeah.
I would say again, I would go like super left, meaning cut it all out for a few months, see what impact it has for you, and then you can maybe put a little bit back in. And as long as you find your own regulation point, right? You can
Mm.
say, and I still do this. Like I have a month where I maybe have eaten more crappy food, and instantly my body, the next cycle I have, I guarantee it's going to be more painful, it's going to have more symptoms, I'll have a shorter cycle. Like instantly we're getting this feedback, and like if we treat our cycle as our feedback loop, we can just be like, oh, I had a really crappy month. The months I have PMS, I have pushed aside some emotional thing that I didn't talk about with my husband. Almost always it will be a fight during my premenstrual phase
Amazing.
versus the months where we've had conversations, we're doing good, no PMS. So it's like the feedback is amazing.
Yeah,
So
it really would be empowering as a teenager to be able to, we can say, listen to your body will tell you what it needs. Well, sometimes it's hard to listen, but when you look at dates on a calendar or heaviness of flow or severity of cramps, like that, it's literally like an email from your body, like, hello, you have not made good choices in the area of health this month. That's amazing to be able to hear that. And, you talk a lot about the fertile lifestyle. Why do you say that applies to everybody, any age and any gender too?
yeah, well, yes, I
Yeah,
think for men it's slightly different because they're not getting this feedback.
sure.
But there's other feedbacks that they are getting. So the fertile lifestyle, I believe that that is a really great way to live in a state of vitality.
I love
So
that.
even though like I'm 40, I think I'll turn 41 this year. Sorry, I had to
I
think
love
about
how we have to do the math. What? I think I have an age. Where is it?
but I am like, and we don't plan on having any more children, but like my husband was like, well, why don't you just have a hysterectomy? And I was like, say what now? Like you want me to pull out the organs in my body so that I don't have to deal with periods anymore? And
Mm,
I'm like, no, 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 just no. And um I feel like that ability to have the feedback and to be so connected to what am I like, how am I doing in general from month to month,
Mm.
right? And my body is constantly giving me this feedback. And I could have moments, I could have periods where, like, what? I didn't even realize today was a day because no symptoms whatsoever. And then
Mhm.
you have the other extreme of like, oh dang, I'm really in a lot of pain. What's going on? And then like reflecting, because that's what menstrual time is about, reflection.
Mm.
And I'll often reflect and say, oh yeah, like we ate out a lot. I probably had a lot more sugar than I normally do. I didn't focus on eating my vegetables. So, like, I would, like, I rely on that feedback from month to month to self regulate. And I'm not perfect. So, there is the need for like, am I getting enough sleep? Am I drinking enough water? Um, am I eating good food? And those are the fertile foundations
Mm.
that we really need to adopt as a society, right? Like,
Yeah.
am I super stressed out? Am I meditating to manage my stress? Just making sure that we are living in full alignment with our bodies and the purpose of why what are we doing in the world.
Mm.
And I believe that that alignment comes out of a fertile lifestyle or the fertile foundations. So we
Yeah.
talked about it a little bit, but getting really good quality sleep, I would put as a top priority. If you're not
Right.
sleeping well, your hormones are going to be out of whack,
Mm.
guaranteed. Um,
Yep. That's so
if
true.
you, yeah, and then two, like stress. And stress is interesting because we don't always have the ability to change what's stressing us. I was more stressed out as a teenager than I am as an adult entrepreneur running two businesses. Like,
Yeah. Well, I
I
mean, yeah, Dr. Heidi Hanna, my professor through the stress mastery classes that I took, she says stress is the gap between your demand and your capacity.
Mhm.
So, yes, your demands as a busy entrepreneur mama are higher, but you're also wiser about dealing with your stress and taking those times and meditating and eating the right food, which means your capacity is higher. So the
Yeah.
gap is smaller, whereas in high school, we're all a hot mess. The gap is huge.
Right. Yeah, I really like that way of saying it. I talk about stress resilience
Ooh.
because we can't always change what our stressors are,
Mhm.
but exactly, if we increase our capacity to handle stress and our relationship or our response to the stress, we're going to have a much better experience in our lives.
Yeah,
Uh,
absolutely. So, I have to tell a story because it's crazy. My husband and I have used natural family planning our entire marriage. So I literally have like years and years and years of charts, like how long my period was and how the temperature was, and all this stuff. And the first cycle ever after our marriage was 54 days long. That was super fun. And literally right in the middle was like an extra period for
hmm,
no good reason. Like a week and a half after my real period, I had like a full week of
wow.
bleeding. So I was so stressed out,
Yeah.
planning a wedding and starting a life and answering all the big real adult questions. And I mean, just what a mess of a cycle, but very, very clear connection between stress and mess, stress and mess in my hormones, and in my cycle. And it's been a long, long road over 17 years fixing a lot of those problems that would have been completely hidden had I not been trying to pay attention to that feedback loop you talk about.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So how about those mamas out there? Because I know we have quite a few in our audience who are in that postpartum phase or maybe beyond postpartum, but they're just exhausted. We're raising our kids, and it feels like maybe we're so exhausted, it feels like we just had a baby,
Mm.
possibly because our hormones are out of whack. Do you have any strategies to not feel tired all the time, to not be craving sugar all the time?
Yes. Yes, definitely. So if postpartum is very interesting because we have what's called the fourth trimester, which is the 3 months right after giving birth.
Hmm.
And that is the most intense period because our hormones are changing a lot.
Yeah.
But it can take, I'm like 2.5 years postpartum, and I still feel it. Like my sleep is still not reset. I still wake up and I'm like, oh, is it morning already?
Aw.
Like just dragging, right? And that is, we can shift it. And I think that when I'm doing well, the way that I'm shifting it is really focusing on supporting my adrenals.
Mm.
So there's a diet. It's poorly named, I think, but it's called the Adrenal Reset Diet by Dr. Alan
Oh,
Christensen.
yeah.
Um, that it's not really a diet. It's more like, when do you eat what you eat? And he says to focus on protein in the morning, protein for lunch, protein and vegetables for lunch, and then focus on the complex carbs for dinner,
Mm.
unprocessed.
Okay. Okay.
uh, and when I can eat in that pattern, and I've been doing it for years, but like after postpartum, it's been a little wonky in terms of like being in a regimen with it. And it really like helps me feel more supported and like increase that feeling of capacity.
Mm.
um so I am a true believer that like the research that he's done is phenomenal. It's just like it takes about 3 weeks of following it religiously to be like, oh, I'm waking up more rested again and I feel amazing, and I have more energy. So it, and that's like caffeine free energy.
Sure.
um
And it's a little bit the flip. I feel like it's a little bit the flip of the American diet, because I know I just heard you say carbs at dinner,
yeah,
fat and protein at breakfast. So no, not pastries, not cereal, not oatmeal, not toast, right? All these things that are like
all things that are
classic American
usually,
breakfast.
yep,
We're talking eggs, avocado, like the avocado toast without the toast.
yes, exactly.
And then keep that up at lunch,
And keep it up
fat
at
and
lunch
protein.
and have a lot more vegetables with it.
Mm, okay.
And
And then your brown rice and your whole grain homemade tortillas and all that kind of thing, save those for dinner.
exactly, exactly.
Nice. Not
Um,
too hard.
it's not. It's really, and what I think is unique about it is because it allows the complex carbs, you actually feel more satisfied on the diet, right? Like you
Mm,
can do a lot of the other diets out there and you're like, uh, it's going to be about 3 months and then you're going to be like falling off of it because it's really
right.
hard to keep up.
Right.
But this actually, you're eating all the different food groups, you're just shifting how you're eating them. And there is actually evidence from Chinese medicine that when we separate our protein and carbs, we digest it better.
Mm,
So there's some truth to like, hey, if we can just like shift and separate out, because we're so used to eating rice with our meat and vegetables,
mm,
or like eating the carbs and protein together. If
okay.
we're able to separate those out, it is a lot better on your digestive system too.
Wow, that's really interesting. See, I hadn't pictured that part. I was like, okay, just save the rice for the evening, but then like you don't have meat. And I have heard that too, that for your liver, that meat takes longer to digest and it's better if you're, further through the digestive process when you get in bed.
Yes.
So having meat at dinner is not so great, or beans or dairy or whatever, wherever your protein source is.
Yeah.
Super interesting. So as moms of little kids, when we think about food, like I'm not going to talk to, I mean, my littler kids are boys, but I'm not, if my daughter was just 6 or 9, I probably wouldn't be talking to her about fertility, but I could be setting up really good habits. So what would you say would be like the one kind of most important habit that moms of kids of any age should do to sort of set them up and build the momentum in the right direction for a fertility lifestyle?
Oh, what would be a good habit? I think I would probably say prioritizing sleep.
Ooh,
Like
no, I wanted
get
to talk
that.
about food, not sleep. No, I'm kidding. I'm terrible at sleeping, but I do make my kids go to bed.
Yeah, and like our almost 3-year-old toddler is in that like revolting
Oh
phase.
no.
So he wants to like stay up and everything's so exciting when it's especially past his bedtime. So really like implementing that routine from the beginning, I think is super important. And I had friends who, or even clients who had babies at the same time, and they were like, how do you get your kids to sleep? Like, our kids are up till 10 o'clock at night. And I'm like, what? You have a 2-year old. Why is he up till 10 o'clock at night? So really like making sure that those boundaries are in place so early on, so that it just becomes part of their natural state, that
Mm,
sleep is the foundation of everything else. If you haven't gotten the right amount of sleep or you haven't slept well, you're probably going to be crabby the next day. You're going to crave more sugar the next day. You're going to not eat your vegetables. Like, and
yeah.
we're seeing the impact of, there's every now and then he's been waking up in the middle of the night and then he's up for an hour, and we don't go and get him, but he's just up for an hour in the middle of the
Yeah.
night. And like, I just know that I better wake up the next day and be ready to deal with drama, because he will be throwing his food away and like, no, I don't want to eat that.
Mm,
And the feedback is so instant.
yeah.
So like good quality sleep has to be the foundation of building the blocks in the future. And we're going to make healthier choices when we're rested and not feeling crappy. So
Yeah.
um
That
I
is definitely the right answer, right? Set those boundaries, make it important, and talk to your kids too. Like as they get older, even little kids, you can say, "Oh man, you didn't sleep very well last night, or you stayed up late." And I think that's, giving you less energy to deal with your day to day, just so that they're beginning to think, right? Sleep has an impact. It's not just this boring thing that we have to do at the end of the day. I think that's an excellent foundation for health. Dr. Aumatma, thank you so very much. I'm a science geek, and so it's all fascinating, even when it doesn't like completely apply to me. Although most of this totally did, because I'm a woman and I'm a mom and I have kids and I have a daughter. So it's all going to very much come in handy. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
Kids Cook World Food listeners, I'm Katie Kimball for the Healthy Parenting Connector, and I will see you again next week with another expert who has the information you need to raise those healthy, independent adults. Thanks for being here.